some problems this is hard and it requires a lot of effort, then it may be easier to just do search. But in general, because the search tree that you have, or search space, grows relatively fast. If you go a little deeper, it's a lot bigger already. So that makes it often very inefficient to use search if the problems are just a little bit bigger than very small. Okay, any questions? No? Beginning of the next lecture. So we're still talking about search, but now we are making it a little bit more difficult by adding more agents. So far we only talked about single agent problems. Right? Your agent was the only one in the world, and nothing else really mattered. Now we're talking about adversarial search gameplay, so where you have other agents with their own goals that might conflict with yours. Games are a very nice setting because they're abstractions from the real world, essentially. So they make a nice setting because they're considerably simpler than the real world, but still capture some of the uncertainty of interacting with the real world. Uncertainty about what other players are doing, or uncertainty about the state of the environment, things like this. So this makes games a very nice playground for developing algorithms that deal with real world problems. Here, I'll just give you an introduction to the most relevant algorithms in gameplay. And we'll focus on a very specific setting. Two-player games, so just two agents. Turn-taking, so at each time point, it's only one agent's turn and the other agent can't do anything. Deterministic, fully observable, you always know the complete game state. Zero-sum, that means the rewards of all players add up to zero, or actually to a constant, it doesn't have to be zero. Or in other terms, if one player wins, the other loses. So whatever I gain, my opponent loses, and vice versa. That makes it a zero-sum game. Time constraint. We typically only have a limited amount of time to decide on a move. That means in most relevant cases, we won't be able to solve the game, as in find the optimal move. Anything unclear about this? What's an example of a game that has all these restrictions?
Chess.
Chess, yes, as you can see on the picture. Yeah.
Example you gave was equal. Other example you gave was equal or go. The other example you gave was equal or go.
Go. Go. Yes, Go is an example. So basically, all kinds of board games. You think about games and all kinds of board games where the whole state of the game can be seen on the board. You don't have any hidden information like cards or stuff.
Sveinn in the wild.
So to solve that, people typically use search, which means we actually have to model the problem as a search problem. Now that should sound familiar. It's very similar to the single agent version of a few additions. We need to have an initial state. We need to know how to encode the state of the problem and what we need to encode in the state, what information. We need to know whose player's turn it is. And we need to know what are the possible actions of that player in the state. what are the legal moves, and then what are the results of doing a certain move in a state. So this gives us the transition model between states. How do we get from one state to the next, and what transitions are possible? And we need to know when the game is over, and know how good that a state is for a certain player, especially for the goal state or for the terminal states. We want to know who has won the game. So the last two items here are like the goal test for the single agent problems, and then in addition you have this decision like whose turn is it. Otherwise it's more or less the same. Basically we need to set up a state transition system. So we have an initial state, we have a bunch of terminal states, we know how to transition between the states, which transitions are possible, and who has won the game. Okay, and yeah. So since we're in the domain of two-player zero-sum games, we can do simplification. We can name the players max and min, and normally if you have two players, then you have two scores. Each player gets a score. But since it's a zero-sum game, we know that whatever the score of one player increases, the other score, the player of the other score must decrease by the same amount. So what we can do is we can only consider the score of one player and say this player wants to maximize his score, and the other player just wants to minimize the first player's score. We just have to look at one score instead of two. That makes it a little simpler. And so we call the players max and min, where the max player wants to maximize his own score, and the min player wants to minimize the max's score. Since we have a time limit, that means each turn, the choice of which action to perform must be made within a specific time limit. So there's only a limited amount of time that each player has to make the move. And typically the state space is very big, so that within that time limit you can only explore a tiny fraction of the state space, which means you can't find the optimal solution typically. You have to deal with suboptimal solutions. Since we're doing search, we have a search tree, which is called the game tree here, and it's very similar to the search tree and the single agent problems, except that we need to label which node belongs to which player. So we have a max node, or max nodes, in which it's the max player's turn, and the max player decides on actions. And we have min nodes, where it's the min player's turn, and the min player decides on actions. That code here should be done. So that typically is what most turn-taking games, this is just level by level. So there's a max level, and then all nodes in the next level will be min player's turn, and then all nodes in the next level will be max player's turn, and so forth. So if we look at the bunch of games, then we see that the branching factor and depth of terminal states are quite large. Like in chess, you get something like 10 to the 40 states in the state space. That is, the tree is actually bigger if you don't discard the visited states. You have a branching factor of around 35, something like 35 possible moves on average. And typically games end after 50 moves, which means after 50 moves for each player, so 100 moves in total. That is, can of course be shorter or longer, but this is roughly the average game. So that means you would have a search tree of 35 to the 100 if you didn't discard revisited states. Okay, and we'll look at the Minimax algorithm, how to solve these problems next time. Any questions? everything that you need for the first programming side. That's all about single agent problems. So there's only the
Nota heuristics drastið í prógramum. Nota heuristics stótið í...
Það lítið vandamál, sko.
Já, þetta bara spurning bara að setja þetta, þú veist.
Have you managed to make an AI that beats a fast code?
There are AIs that can beat bad human players.
Hvað þetta langt?
Bad pros.
11 mínútur.
Herra, ég veit ekki að við on the actual 19 by 19 size
Hver ekki var náður? Aron? Óli
Unnar
ætlaði að segja koma dagpassa. Unnar hefur aldrei skíðað mér heldur en sko 3 ferðir í þessum og 2.
Robbi líka.
Robbi ekki
Hvernig að taka mynda mér? Ekki.
Líka þessi góð kvátt.
Þetta er alveg ískalt.
Já, það alltaf, það er svo vel.
Það ekki bara mikið sem ekki vindur og hérna að leður smá.
Ég held að vera nokkuð veginn logn, það er bara frost.
Það eru hérna, hvernig, snjókoma 10 stiga frost, 2 metrar á sekúndu.
Lækka, hvað er vindur?
Það er bara mjög góð. Við erum að tala að þetta var djamma í 14 stiga frosti.
Sweet. Game on.
Djamma í 20 stiga frosti?
15 stiga frosti.
15 stiga frosti.
Það er alveg tvöfalt kaldara laugardagskvöld heldur en föstudagskvöld.
Já, ok. Þetta verður bara sweet.